Hey budding lawyers, welcome to the podcast. I am Prasanna Naidu and this episode is going to be hosted by Rajesh and Amir who are going to talk to Adithya Variath. Adithya Variath is a researcher from Maharashtra National Law University in Mumbai and his interests vary from international law, R2P, artificial intelligence and pop culture. In this conversation, you are going to get a mix of all these and much more. Trust me, I've gone through this whole conversation and it is very interesting, especially for those who are interested in international law. But yeah, there were some internet issues, audio video issues at some points, so pardon us for that. Now, before we move on to the conversation, let me tell you about Unacademy. Unacademy is India's largest education platform. And if you're preparing for CLAT, LSAT, and other such law entrance exams, then you must definitely check out this platform. A unique thing about Unacademy is that you don't have to buy a course, you have to buy a subscription. Once you buy the subscription, you can access all the courses available there. There are different types of subscriptions according to the features available there. You can choose that subscription which best suits your needs. You can get the subscription for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, etc. And soon there is going to be a price hike. So check out the website today itself and buy the subscription as soon as possible. Here are the details of some batches which are going to start in next few days. The mentors which you can see here are those mentors which are going to mentor you throughout that course and you can interact with them one-on-one too. Check out Unacademy today, the link is in description and do not forget to use my code BUDDING10 to get a special discount. And that's it. Now let's just start our conversation with Adithya Variath.
So a very good morning to one and all. Whoever is watching us today, and welcome to the Budding Lawyers podcast. Today we have a very special guest with us. We have Mr. Adithya Variath with us, and Sir is a researcher at the Center for Air and Space Law at MNLU Mumbai, and has also recently completed his LLM from the DNLU Jabalpur. And Sir also happens to have written a very interesting book on international law, which was published by Thomson Reuters, a big name to that. So, welcome to the show, sir. How are you doing today?
Going good. Thank you so much for having me.
It's completely our pleasure. So, I'll just begin by asking you, how did the journey into law happen? How did you venture into this field? And then the turn towards air and space law. Take us to that.
Okay, so I took science in 12th because I scored good marks in 10th. And my mother wanted me to become a doctor. So I was preparing for NEET exams. But I always had some interest towards economics and civics because both my parents are lawyers. But yet they wanted me to become a doctor. So I scored very bad in my 12th and I flunked the NEET exams. So then my dad told me that if you are not able to become a doctor by pursuing a PhD and venture into law. So I gave the MHCET back then. I got admission into law, and once I started law, I got pretty much interested in the subject, predominantly because I used to read newspapers. I used to watch a lot of politics. I was very much passionate about observing the changes in society. So law attracted me because of these two things, because we are studying the society and we are also studying politics, and we are also studying how law is responding to society and politics. So that's how law actually kicked off. And I used to score good marks in law. So I thought this is very nice. Academically, it is going good. It is going good. So this is how it started. So like every student of law, I was attracted to constitutional law because it is a thing, right? If you like politics, if you like society, then constitutional law is the subject for you. So I thought I'll do my master's in constitutional law because DNLU had a course on constitutional law. But when I entered in my 4th year and 5th year, I was also following nations. I was also writing for various platforms, including Modern Diplomacy, about foreign policy and these changes. And this happened because I used to follow a think tank called as ORF, Observer Research Foundation. So I used to watch a lot of videos. So I thought I should also read more about this subject. So therein I went to DNLU. I thought I'll do my master's in constitutional law. But I happened to meet very good people there. especially Professor Swati Parmar, with whom I co-authored my first book. So she was telling me about international law, and I got attracted to the subject. Since I was also writing about the subject, so there was this alignment between my interest and the subject of international law. So for me, international law is like my wife, and constitutional law is like my extramarital affair that I have. So I'm trying to bring these two things together for my PhD. So this is how it's going.
But I believe somewhere when you talk of liking constitutional law, so people who are who have affinity towards that subject, you eventually end up reading comparative constitutional law, and then you venture into international law. So I guess that happens by default only.
Yes, absolutely. Anyways, you see, the changes in the local constitutions actually impact international law, and international law also responds to changes in your domestic system. For example, what we are witnessing in Ukraine, okay, or in Russia. What is happening in Russia is a domestic issue. Okay, but the thing is that because of these changes, international law is responding. So there is always a affinity or this invisible line between these two subjects. And this is how I try to link both these themes.
So, like, we also agree with you that, whatever changes happen in one nation's internal affairs, international law has some ramifications. It responds in a certain way. So, like, since we have started the subject of the entire thing going on in Ukraine and Russia, so, I mean, I also looked up in your profile that you do a lot of research in right to protect. How did that idea start, first of all?
Okay, this theme that I talk about is R2P. That is responsibility to protect. Okay, so this topic is very interesting because it is a response of international law towards crisis. And when we talk about international law, what do you mean by international law? We are talking about relation between states. Okay, so I always try to equate states with people. For example, as humans, as people of this society, we like to live in a society wherein principles of equality, liberty, and fraternity are protected. Okay, if a society protects your equality, if a fraternity gives you liberty, if a society helps you to live in fraternity, you are happy to live in a society which protects these principles. Same is the case with states also. States like to live in a society that protects equality. That can be called as sovereign equality for states. States like to live in a society that protects liberty. Liberty can be independence of states or non-interference by other states. States like to live in a society that promotes fraternity. Fraternity could be an international legal order or a global community. Okay, so we live in a global community, and this global community in which we live in, all states are living through a system called as collective security system. That is how UN is formed. Okay, now what is collective security system? For example, Rajesh, Ameya, and Aditya, all three of us live in a collective security system. And suppose a senior comes and bullies Ameya. Okay, so Rajesh and Aditya will go and hit that bully because he actually attacked one of our member. Okay, so responsibility to protect is also an international norm that that is framed on this structure. So this happened predominantly because there is something known as humanitarian interventions, which we call states intervening into affairs of other countries where there is crisis. Now, the problem is that states, just like humans, keep self-interest as their priority. States, just like us, are hesitant to fight someone who is stronger than us. For example, we can fight someone who hits Ameya if he's similar to our size. For example, a big show comes and hits Ameya. I don't think we both will go and fight that big show because we are not in a position to fight him. Okay, so same is the case with states as well. So what is the system that happened before this R2P thing was that, as Ameya talked about Yugoslavia and all this, Rwanda and all these things. So there were issues in the domestic system that can be considered as genocide, but states acted very late. And when you live in an international society, states have to respond immediately when there is crisis. So because the states failed in the past, R2P was a solution to this problem. Okay, R2P was a norm that was created, and I think the most important player in this entire system is the ICSS, that is an international commission for sovereignty and humanitarian interventions. They actually framed something known as R2P. So what did they actually do? They provided some structure to the system. Now with humanitarian intervention is that states will act when they want to act. Okay, if my friend is attacking Amaya, I will not attack that friend because I have a relation with my other friend also. So what did R2P do? R2P provided a structure. So this is what we call as progressive codification. We are saying streamline things. We provided some structure, all these things. So R2P ने actually structure दे दिया ये पूरे scene को. So where there was, where states used to act on the basis of their self-interest, their discretion, R2P actually provided a structure. Okay, now what is this structure? This is the second question. Now R2P when developed was based on three important principles. First is responsibility to prevent. It means where there are situations where it could lead to something like a genocide or war crimes or all these things, international states as well as the individual state has a responsibility to prevent it. Okay, and if they are unable to prevent and the situation goes out of hand, the international community has a responsibility to respond. Okay, what they could not prevent, now something has happened, I want to respond. Now, while you are responding to this crisis, response can be in the form of sanctions, it can be in the form of interventions, it can be in the form of military actions. It will ultimately lead to some issues in the society. Because when I'm attacking someone, I'm in a way harming the civilians, I'm harming the infrastructure. So there is also a responsibility to rebuild. So R2P broadly functions on these three principles, these three elements. Now, this system of R2P segregates different powers to different people. Okay. First, R2P actually puts a responsibility on you as an individual state to ensure that your people are not subject to things like genocide or war crimes or ethnic cleansing. Okay. Like the crimes that we talk about in international criminal law. If the state is unable to prevent it, then the international society has to provide means to actually maintain peace and order. So this is the second pillar, on the basis of which states will have to respond to this crisis by providing assistance. Okay, this is what we are seeing when Ukraine is asking for help and states are providing them with ammunition or states are trying to negotiate things, all these things. And when this does not happen, comes the third important pillar that we call as collective security. Okay. Now, collective security is what? It can be in the form of humanitarian interventions. Okay. So R2P ne kya kiya? R2P has actually changed the rhetoric of humanitarian interventions to R2P by providing a better structure to the system. Now, actually the problem with this whole system, even with the Ukraine crisis, is that it has not only exposed Russia's future on how they look at the world, but it has actually exposed the inefficiency of this system that we call as United Nations. Okay, I think we are seeing a lot of memes regarding how UN is functioning. Okay, so what is this crisis actually showing is that UN system is something that requires overall, not in terms of its structure, but also in terms of its functioning. We know about the UNSC. United Nations Security Council functions on something known as veto power. There are 5 members. If any one of them, okay. Now, there are 2 important things when it comes to Ukraine. Russia is a member of UNSC. China is a member of UNSC. So even if the world community comes together, and as R2P says that, when can state intervene? When the UNSC mandates it. Now, since Russia is a member of UNSC, can Russia, talk about something? Can Russia say that, "Aao mujhe attack kar lo"? So this is the problem. So now the second problem is with the system in general. We live in an international community, an international society. How can 5 countries decide what is right for the rest 190 plus countries? Okay, so we are giving this unguided superpower to these 5 countries, telling them you will decide what is right for us. Okay, and this system is something that was actually plaguing the system of international law. And the problem was that this system was used against weak states. Libya le lo, Iran le lo, Somalia le lo, South Sudan le lo. So these were small states. कि इस पे कुछ हो गया तो that was not affecting the big players. Now an important player is in picture, like someone who is a part of UNSC. And this time, the actors who used to decide the discourse of the world, They are in picture. They are the point here. Now they don't want to use the powers within this ambit against themselves. Okay. And UN jo hai, we talk about United Nations was built to actually maintain peace and order. There are two important articles of UN Charter that we should read. Article 2.4, जो कहता है कि international peace बहुत जरूरी है, etc., etc. And Article 2.7 that states UN should not interfere into affairs of domestic states. Okay. Now the problem here is that this right is a conditional thing. Okay, this principle is conditional. If UNSC deems it is okay to interfere, taking into account certain conditions, okay, I'm breaking it down into layperson terms. If there are issues like genocide or war crimes, okay, ethnic cleansing, then UNSC can mandate responses. Okay, responses can be economic sanctions, responses can be military interventions. Okay, now the thing is that this has to be sanctioned by UNSC. Okay, in Ukraine crisis, the problem is that R2P cannot be sanctioned. This responsibility, even though there is responsibility, idea is there, but it can't be implemented because the players who have the right to implement it are themselves a party to this case. Okay, so we are also seeing the breaking down of the system that we call as UNSC and also the system called as R2P. There are ideas, novel ideas. Genocide nahi hona chahiye, ethnic cleansing nahi hona chahiye. There should not, war crimes is not a subject of international law. It should not be a part of regular functioning. But despite these ideals, we don't have a system that can be implemented to stop this. So this is a wider picture, I would say. Like this is exposing this flaws, this defects in the system.
So I understand. I completely agree with you that R2P basically gave the opinio juris that we talk of, but state practice is again lacking because there haven't been much instances wherein R2P was particularly involved. But or was there?
So Rajesh, if I can just add on to this also.
Yeah, sure.
So if you look at the system of UN, I think UNSC has used R2P in almost 80 resolutions. Okay, in South Sudan, in Libya, Syria, etc., during Congo and all these things. And even the ICJ, in the prevention of the genocide case, talked about this responsibility, that international states have a responsibility. But the thing is that when can this be used? When all these 5 UNSC members agree to this. Now, the thing is that when you are giving this right to these 5 states to take a decision on responsibility to protect, what is right for them is right for us. Okay, if these 5 states think that is not something where that requires intervention, then they'll not intervene. So R2P has been used, but selectively on the basis of what these 5 members feel. That is the problem with the system.
Right. So, so I was coming to the prevention of genocide, but I was coming to the Bosnia case. When the Bosnia case in which we saw that this convention on genocide was held to be a peremptory norm, and then state succession wasn't actually a bar when it came to on the erstwhile Federal Republic of Yugoslavia when it broke down. So the liability was put on them and state succession was not an issue. So the question would be, would it not be considered a peremptory norm, R2P, because it's definitely a humanitarian response to war. Should be a peremptory norm. I mean, there should be no deviation allowed.
Yes, definitely. But the thing, there are thinkers like he's a very interesting author known as Marty Koskinemi. Okay, and he says that international law is not a law in general; it is also international politics. Okay, so you will see that international law and international politics are something that are closely they function together. Now the thing with Bosnia or the former Yugoslavia is that international community failed to respond at the time when it was required to do. Okay, even though we call it as something that is important. Okay, that is something that should be in a normative society, it should be adhered to. But the thing is that the actors who actually implement this are political actors. And you will see political actors function not on the basis predominantly of law, but on their self-interest, on what they deem is right, on what is necessary for them. So the problem with this system is also the same, that even though R2P, global peace, ensuring that genocide does not take place is something that should be followed. But the thing is that the people who follow it, the state actors who follow it on the basis of their interest. So the problem with international law is that, okay, that is the reason why we need to study international law separate from the domestic law. Domestic law, we can say, ये article hai, and we have to follow this article. So like same is the case with constitutional law. For example, let's talk about democratic crisis. So there have been instances where a dictator comes to power and he removes 2 articles from the constitution of that particular country. And what were these 2 articles? These 2 articles were articles that empowered the Supreme Court. So he made a constitutional change, but what did he do? He removed the powers of the Supreme Court. Okay. So the players, so even though international law or may be constitutional law, they are not self-enforcing. Okay. Institution and institutional actors enforce it. Just because we have a constitution does not mean that all things are right. For example, I'll give an example of a very good country. That country gives the right to freedom of press, right to equality, freedom of speech and expression, right to election, right to vote, right for you to contest elections in the constitution of that country. This looks like a good society, right? Because it gives you all these rights. This is an example of North Korea. North Korea's constitution gives you all these rights. Okay. So the problem is that you will have a system, but the thing is that this system is not self-enforcing. We need actors who will enforce it. This is the same with international law also, that there are norms, there are these things that should be adhered to, but the institutional actors are not ready to accept it. Okay, this is the flaw with the system, the institutions that function in this domain.
Last example which you gave was a very good example. So now, since we are, so if I ask you, going forward in this doctrine of R2P, that okay, if we see something which is happening in Ukraine and Russia, so if UNSC approves that RTP can be done, so which countries can, what can they do? So for example, there are many countries which have, some of their people living in Ukraine, right? So, obviously one of their concerns is that they need to bring their nationals back to their home country. So to what extent can R2P can be done? So, if it can be some social sanctions or economic sanctions, or, it can go up to as far as any military power, something like that. So how far can R2P be exercised?
Okay. Oh, this is a wonderful point. Okay. So R2P, when I talk about response, the thing is that this response is something that is within the UN Charter. Okay, this is not something beyond the UN Charter. Now, what does UN Charter say? They talk about mediation, they talk about provisional measures, they talk about sanctions, and collective security that we call as interventions or military interventions are the last resort. When everything fails, you are venturing into armed resolutions. So the thing with this system is that to enter into something we call as armed interventions, okay, all other things should fail. Okay, I think all other things have already failed, the way we can see it, mediation and all these things. Now, the problem here is that UNSC will decide, which is very unlikely because Russia is a part of UNSC. Suppose Russia was not a part of UNSC. Let's talk about this situation. And UNSC decides that let us enforce collective security system. Now they can actually ask regional organizations to do something. It could be a NATO. Okay, that's how NATO functions. It could be UN asking some states to provide assistance in the form of military power. Now, it is very unlikely for big states to fight with big states because it will lead to a situation that we call as the war that we talk about. Okay. Now, what are states doing? States are trying to put in sanctions, economic sanctions. Now, in the case of Russia and this Ukraine conflict, there is also a big necessity to study how sanctions functions. If you remember, 2 days back, the head of the Russian army said that this sanction is a myth. These economic sanctions are myth. Now, what is the problem here with sanctions? Now, this is very interesting to see how Russia has responded. Okay, so the effectiveness of sanction works on the basis of how strong and how harsh the sanctions are. Okay, and the thing what Russia is doing in Ukraine, it has precedent. It has happened in 2014 also, when the past president lost the election. Okay, so in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea, there were sanctions. And sanctions, what it do? it actually stopped the growth of Russia by 3%. It is around $50 billion every year. Despite having these sanctions, Russia still holds Crimea. Okay. Why is this possible? Because Russia did something that is less talked about, is making their economy sanction proof. Okay, Russia has actually made their economy sanction proof. Now, how is this possible? It starts with disassociating itself and its association with dollar. Okay, Russia has actually restructured its trade routes. Russia has actually restructured its banking system. Russia has actually, found new partners to trade apart from US and all these things. And with sanctions also, if you look, I think Russia accounts to almost 40% of Europe's gas supply, almost 1/3 of Europe's oil. Okay, and Russia is very important. If you put a restriction on oil or on gas, what will happen is that Europe will have to face the consequences. For example, electricity shortages. And this is happening in a phase where after the COP agreement, Conference of Parties for Climate Change, we are abandoning coal. We are moving towards more sustainable energy resources. So if sanctions are imposed, it will actually hurt Russia more. Okay. For example, in 2018, there was this Russian oligarch on whom sanctions were imposed, aluminum oligarch. What happened was that after this sanction, the price of aluminum actually spiked and they had to take back the sanction. The sanctions were reversed. Okay. So the problem is that with sanctions also, Putin is playing very smartly. He has framed his policies in a way that even if you impose sanctions, we will get a hit definitely, but you will also get a hit. Okay. So the sanctions that they're talking about of maintaining swift payment, all these things, blocking their banking system and putting restrictions on the way you use their funds. This has happened same with Iran in 2012. Kya hua tha? They put a ban. Okay. It actually changed the behavior of Iran, but it led to a lot of unrecoverable loans by the states who actually put in money. So if you block their banking system, it will lead to unrecoverable loans. If you put a sanction on on parts like oil or gas, it will hurt Europe more. So I think we live in a society where Europe is more dependent on Russia than Russia being more dependent on Europe. Okay. So how effective this sanction would be is also a very interesting point. And apart from this sanctions that we talk about, it all depends on the actor who is taking decisions. Does Putin really care about sanctions now? Okay. Is he ready to take a hit? And if he's ready to take a hit, considering every time Putin does something like this, his popularity index goes up. Okay. When he annexed Crimea, his popularity index went up. So there are a lot of domestic politics also involved in this crisis. For example, if he's able to, like, he has already recognized these two states, this Donetsk and Luhansk, as independent states. Now, both these states want to be associated with Russia. And every time Putin shows his expansionist nature, his popularity rating goes up. So I think these all actors also play into, play a important picture in this whole conflict. Because as I said, international law or constitutional law, they are not self-enforcing. Okay, all depends on the actors who wants to use it. Okay, for example, if dictatorship suits me more, I'm ready for a dictatorship. If my society is ready to live in a dictatorial society, then I am happy to function this way. Okay, same is the case with Russia. If they are happy with what Russian is with what Putin is doing, then they're okay with it. So the problem here is not international law. The problem here is actors, okay, who actually run the society. So this is the problem with this whole crisis.
So I had one more doubt. So if I can ask you some more thing about that. So, is there a border that, any economic sanction or any sanctions which are imposed? So basically the aim is to, sanction against a country, right? You sanction a nation, or if you, if you remove the wheel, then you can sanction a few people of that countries. So, to what extent is that action okay? So for example, if I put sanctions on a country, then that's a different thing. But then if you start sanctioning people, I mean, we are hearing some news that, some, for example, if any university or college, they start to suspend students belonging to some country, giving the excuse that, that country is in a war, something like that. So, is that action legal? So if you sanction a country, that's a different thing. But if you sanction students or countries of that, people of that country, so is that also legal? What is the border?
Okay. So the thing that you talked about, holding people accountable for their actions. Okay. This will be a part of international criminal law. Okay. Wherein individuals can be held accountable for their actions. But the thing with UN is that sanctions are imposed on the states for their actions. Okay. Because who is functioning? The state is functioning. Okay. Even though we are saying that Putin is taking a decision, who is Putin? He's the head of the state. Okay. So there is also backstory of this whole sanctions. So whenever sanctions have been imposed on countries, maybe economic sanctions, all these things, it happened with Iraq, Syria, and all these things. The real sufferers are the people. Okay, the people who live in that particular country. For example, in 2014, there were sanctions on travels, on people, on sanctions on technology, sanctions on taking loans, and all these things. The core part of society who will suffer because of this is not Putin's family, but the people of Russia. Okay. So whenever sanctions are imposed, there is also a need to take into account what are the after effects of the sanctions. Will it lead to higher human rights violations? For example, there are research papers by Anne Oxford and all these scholars who talk about, military interventions happening, UN peacekeeping forces entering the society, and then what is happening there? There are sexual assaults on people. Okay, wherein sex is used as something in return of getting food. You need to, give sexual favors to someone to get supply of food. All these things happen. Why? Because sanction, what it actually does, it actually disturbs the order of the society. Okay, my society is functioning using a model, and when sanctions are imposed, when restrictions are imposed, there is also restructuring of the society. So this is also important to take into account. If I'm imposing heavy sanctions, will it lead to other human rights violations? Because at the end, what are we talking about? Global peace, global order, protection of society. So my sanction cannot be, have only one idea that I should stop this actor from going wild. I should also take into account what are the after effects, what will happen after that. Okay, that is the reason why you see that even though sanctions are imposed, they are very calculative. They are very calculative. It is not a blanket ban on things, a blanket stopping of things, because there are other actors also involved, not just the decision maker, but also civilians. Okay, why should the civilian take the hurt of somebody who is acting like this? So there has to be some balance, and creating this balance is very important. Even though हमने तो ऐसा discuss कर लिया कि balance हो जाना चाहिए, sanctions should not actually be blanket, but the thing is that how will you calculate all these things? Okay, this becomes very important, and all these things are implementation part. Law can talk about ideas, okay, but in principle how it will be implemented depends on the actors and all these things. So sanctions ka ye jo hai future kya hai, it depends on how well we are able to balance these things.
As you said, the international law is an idea, right? And the organizations and the ultimately is upon who the actors are and all those things. So I wanted to ask a question that, okay, if someday if there is no United Nations is not there, right? For example, League of Nations is not there or United Nations is not there. So then, the validity of those international ideas, as you said, will that continue to exist or will that cease to exist?
Okay, very interesting question actually. So you will see League of Nations, actually World War II happened because League of Nations failed. Okay, and League of Nations was created after World War I. Okay, and necessity was there that there has to be. So if you go back to the history of international law, so there is something called as Treaty of Westphalia. Okay, that happened in 1648. What did Treaty of Westphalia do? It actually made what we call as the modern state. It actually, the statehood that we talk about, modern state was formed after Treaty of Westphalia. And you will see international law functions on the basis of something what we call as sovereignty of states. Now, the problem with this system is that this is not one sovereign state. Earth is not a one sovereign state. There are multiple actors living together. Okay, some sovereigns are powerful, some sovereigns are weak, some states are small, some states have different interests. Okay, so you will see there is diversity, not just in the basis of their geographical structure, but also on the basis of their needs, on the basis of the consequences that they face, the threats that they have. For example, Antarctica face issues relating to climate change much more than what we face. Okay, for example, Israel face issues of national security much more than Switzerland. Okay, because they are the borders are enemy states and all these things. So you will see there are multiplicity of problems. Okay, and in a society, if we talk about jurisprudence, we say that Thomas Hobbes ne bola tha ki we need a Leviathan in society so as to maintain order, so as to avoid chaos. Okay, so why do we need a Leviathan? Why do we need something known as an institution that can maintain a balance? Because of this element known as social control. Okay, society can be controlled when there is a Leviathan. Okay, same is the case with states also. When can you manage states? When there is consensus, when there is representation, when there is a proper system on the basis of which we take actions, like the procedure established by law that we talk about. Okay, why do we need a procedure established by law? So as to avoid chaos. Okay, so as to ensure that arbitrariness is not a part. Okay, so same is the case with international legal system. We need bodies like international UN, or may it be another body in the future. Why? So as to ensure that there is proper control, there is a systemic process. Okay, and when there are issues like this institution can actually mandate responses. Okay, so like I am also working on a work in which I am talking about an idea called as God. Okay, UN se kaun bachayega? Bhagwan bachayega. And this Bhagwan in the form of God, and GOD stands for Group of Democracies. Okay, so what can be a future reform of UN can be something known as Group of Democracies, God, wherein these institutions, democratic countries, can come together and take actions on the basis of a democratic process, not on the basis of these 5 nations deciding what is right. Okay, so future can lie on the basis of representation, ensuring that there is inclusivity, diversity, and all these things. So this is where the approach of TWAIL and all these ideas comes into picture. Okay, when I'm talking about representation, inclusivity, problems with the existing system, and all these ideas.
Sir, as far as the GOD that you mentioned, so when we refer to the Montevideo Convention's definition of state, oftentimes the discourse when it comes to the 4 essentials that they gave, like a state government, capability to enter into relationship with other states. So oftentimes when they talk of the government, they only focus on a democratically elected government. So I believe the discourse is already tilted towards God somewhere, and we would move in that direction.
Yes, definitely. I also feel the same, because I am not a big fan of UN system actually. I've been, even in my writings, I've been very critical about the system of UN. Okay, but the problem is that with UN system, we are not picking the best. Okay, we are picking the less worst amongst the worst systems. Okay, same is the case with politicians that we elect. Okay, so UN is a necessity. It's like, I can equate it like a necessary evil, like as John Austin talked about state. Okay, UN is a necessary evil, because without UN, you will see societies, hampering down. You will see breaking down of societies. The role played by UN, I'll say it's brilliant. Without UN, I think we would have ventured into more wars. Okay, but the problem is that just because you did 100 things right and you are doing 10 things wrong, we cannot say that, okay, you are right. You have to be held accountable for the 10 things that you are doing wrong. Okay, so same is the case with UN. There is a need for reform. Okay, and that reform will come only when there is systemic changes, when there is proper representation. So the whole idea of TWAIL starts on this picture, okay, of reforming systems, reforming institutions.
So if we have to ask you, so when you talk of reforming systems and when you talk of putting the idea of a third world approach into it, so do you think that in the future, like how would you say that what should a UN be as per TWAIL? How should the UNSC look as per a TWAIL approach, from a TWAIL approach?
Okay. Okay. So for people who don't know about TWAIL, I'll break this concept down. Okay. TWAIL means third world approaches to international law. Okay. And TWAIL, what we have to understand is actually a movement. Okay. Movement by scholars and readers like us who are actually saying that the present structure of international law is not the perfect one. Okay. And on what basis am I saying this? Because international law, as we study, is Eurocentric in nature. Okay. Best example is that both of you have studied jurisprudence. Okay. Name an Indian thinker that you studied.
That is the it's often the debate of not including Mimamsa and only including the foreign
Yes.
ways of.
Yes. So you will see the same. This is the case with international law also. On the basis, if you look at the foundations of international law, there were two groups, for a layperson's understanding. There were the Europeans, who were the civilized, and there were people who were non-civilized, according to the Europeans. Okay. Now the problem here was that the civilized Europeans told the world that this non-civilized people are barbaric. Okay. They are not in a position to govern themselves. So what we will do, we have the burden of ensuring that the world becomes a civilizing society. So I will help you to govern. Okay, I will tell you what can be the perfect law for you. Since you are barbaric, you don't know what is right. We will tell you what is right. What led to this? Colonialism. Colonialism was nothing but this, like the Europeans telling others that, oh, you don't know how to make laws, how to trade. We will tell you how to trade. Okay. Now, with the rise of colonialism, you will see, if you are interested in IP, you can read about the Berne Convention. Is the first convention on copyrights. Who were the major players who were taking decisions? The colonies. Okay. The people who were actually governing the colonies were taking the decision. The colonizers were making the laws. May it be the case with League of Nations. Okay. Who were the people who were taking decisions? The people who were the colonizers. Okay. After World War II, we have the examples of UN coming into picture after World War II. The whole movement was saying that a group of states should not decide what is right for others, like what the Europeans did during colonialism. Europeans decided what is right for the world. Equate this idea with UNSC. A group of people are telling you what is right for others. Okay. Now, there have been treaties in the past that talked about division of Africa. So what was happening was that this Africa, this regions in Asia, were not considered as equals. They were considered as mere subjects whom others will govern. And this is also reflective on the basis of the theory that comes out. Okay. The books that we refer to, the scholars that we read about. We read about natural law, we read about positive law, we are reading European minds, European ideas. Okay. I don't think we read about dharma when we talk about natural law. I don't think we read about Ram Raja when we talk about how a society should function. On the other hand, if you go back to history, when we read Ramayana, you will see that the chastity of the queen was asked by an individual, a civilian, wherein the king was held accountable by an individual. Okay, we have seen examples of scriptures where gods are punished. On the other hand, if you look at the theology of Europe, if you question the god, then you are a sinner. Okay, because the god can do no wrong. But on the other hand, we have rich heritage where people, like even gods, are held accountable. Okay, but we don't study it. Why is this system penetrating even today? Why is this European ideas penetrating even today? It's because our understanding of the subject is based on European values. It is reflective in theory. It is reflected in theorists that we study. It is also reflective in the system of law. So TWAIL is actually a movement that actually criticizes this European approach, Eurocentric nature of international law, but also it provides an alternative. So TWAIL ऐसा नहीं है कि TWAIL ने बस criticize कर दिया और छोड़ दिया. TWAIL is actually giving you an alternative idea. And this alternative idea lies on few principles. It talks about not just representation, but also contribution. It is not important that you are represented in this meeting, but your views should also be taken into accounts. Okay, your opinion should matter in the way the society should function. Okay, so TWAIL, what it does, it actually questions subjects, question the theoretical understanding, but while criticizing, you also provide an alternative approach. This alternative approach can use multiple tools. Marxism can be a tool. Feminism can be a tool. Indian approaches can also be a tool. Dharma can be a tool. Chinese version of international law can also be a tool. Okay, but what are we doing? We are just putting out our ideas in the mainstream, and this will only happen when you will look at this subject not as something that is essentially a European subject, but something that requires diversity. And how will you ensure diversity? By ensuring that all countries come together and have a say in what should be the discourse of the law. Okay, therein this idea of God comes into play. Group of democracies coming together, wherein all democracies have equal right to take a decision, not giving this collective right to a few European states or few American states, wherein democratic countries come together and make decisions on the basis of democracy, on democratic values. And democracy cannot be a discretion of few members. Democratic practices have to be democratic in nature. So TWAIL actually provides for, actually questioning this authority, questioning these institutions. For example, you will see if you look at World Bank and IMF, the heads of World Bank and IMF have only been Europeans and Americans. And you have seen how badly Americans have managed their economy when the recession came. So you see, but we are still empowering them to take decisions in institutional matters like World Bank or IMF. Europe is mismanaging their economy. You will see the rise of Europe as an economic power is declining. Yet they are taking decisions regarding IMF and trade activities and all these things. So you need diversity. You need critical thinkers to come and question the validity. There is a need to actually reread and retell the stories of international law. There is a need to bring in our scriptures, may it be a Mahabharata or may it be Ramayana, or may it be our documents, our history as the history of the world. And when I'm saying that there is a need to mainstream our history, I do not mean that others should follow my history. Okay, but our history should also have a place, just like their history has a place. Okay, and you see, whenever I write papers, I always take this aspect into account, that when I write papers, I do not focus on the legal aspect. I focus on four important things. First is the social aspect. Second is the political aspect. Fourth is the economic aspect, and the third is the economic aspect, and the fourth is the historical aspect. Because you will see, problems that we face in the society are never legal problems. Are problems either of economic nature or problems either of political nature, problems that could be historical problems. For example, if the temperature of the world rises to 2 more degree, then it will lead to global warming. This is something that the scientists told us. What is the law doing? Law is just formalizing what the scientists told us. For example, I was facing hardships as a trader because I had to file different taxes. That was an economical problem. GST came in as a solution to solve this economic problem. Same is the case with international law also. Okay, international law comes in as a savior to solve either an economic problem, that we talk about trade related aspects, that we talk about IP. International law came in as a savior to solve political problems, that could be democratic crisis. Okay, international law also came in as a savior to solve the historical problems. But if international law wants to solve historical problems, history is not a sole domain of one particular region. History cannot be Eurocentric in nature. History is history because history is divergent. So in terms of theory, when I talk about TWAIL, TWAIL is actually a moment to put in our history as a topic that requires much discourse, that requires debate. Okay, so TWAIL is actually an idea that is an alternative idea we can talk about, providing an alternative history, providing an alternative understanding. If you read more about colonialism, TWAIL also talks about decolonialism and post-colonialism. Okay, there are excellent works by Professor Prabhakar Singh from Jindal, who has written about TWAIL. There are papers by Anthony Angie, who talks about imperialism as a form of system. There are papers on capitalism and international law. So you will see TWAIL, what is it doing? It is providing these alternative ideas to the system. So basic understanding kya hai? We are saying international law is Eurocentric. TWAIL is saying international law is not Eurocentric, by using different modes to actually give clarity to this idea and this definition.
Wow. I mean, this is a masterclass on international law that we are witnessing right now. But it's amazing. So as you were saying of like 5 countries should not decide for the world. So the model that we see in COP, like a group of countries, they decide how the enforcement of UNFCCC is happening and all of that, and they decide the norms. So would that to some extent be how UNSC would look like? A few countries, they get elected as per popular mandate, like it happens for the 10 non-permanent members right now. And then they become the kind of leviathan or the decision makers for that particular period of time, whatever the future legislators they decide. So that be the
now the problem. Yes, fantastic, Rajesh. Actually, the problem here is that what happened with COP? US left. Okay, US was not a part. The problem, I think, we are in a very nascent state to actually predict what the system should look like. So I think the system of international law is actually a compromise. Okay, we are okay with the system functioning because we are not able to find an alternative idea of how the system should look like. Now I'm talking about this idea of God, that is group of democracies, wherein I'm saying democratic process se decisions lena chahiye, ye zaruri hai. But the problem is that what if 2 or 3 major superpowers decide not to be a part of God? This was the same case that happened with League of Nations. League of Nations failed because some major players were not interested to be a part of League of Nations. They backed out. So the sustenance of any system will depend upon how well this system is able to accommodate interest of some major powers. Okay, even though let us talk about ideas of international law. Sovereign equality is an idea of international law, that it means that all sovereigns are equal in its functioning. But is a Bhutan and a US equal? Is a China and one small island in Africa are the equals? Is a Somalia and a Russia equal? Okay, even though I talk about sovereign equality, you will see that even though this is a good idea, states are inherently unequal in nature. Inequality is there. But how does the system function? By ensuring that we are able to accommodate these inequalities in the system. So the success of UN, I'll not say that UN has failed, but I'll say UN, there are defects. If UN fails tomorrow and we are thinking of a new system that should govern the world, the success will depend upon how well that system is able to accommodate these actors. For example, I'll give an example regarding humanitarian interventions. Since we were talking about Ukraine, there was an intervention done by NATO without the authority of UN. On the other hand, system of law ये कहता है कि UN जब आपको कहेगा, then you have to intervene. There are examples where interventions happened outside the purview of UN. Now, from our idea, this is wrong because law जो था आपने उसको follow नहीं किया. Okay, but it was okay. Why? Because the people who will decide whether this was okay or not were the people who did the intervention. Now you will see the system was able to accommodate them. On the other hand, tomorrow, according to principles of United Nations, you breached UN's idea. So I am removing US and 5 European countries outside, removing them from UN structure. These 5 countries have the capacity to actually disturb the world economic order. Why is this system functioning even today? Because we are accommodating their defects. So if we assume that God is the future and group of democracies can be a better model, their success will also depend upon these factors. कि क्या मैं accommodate कर सकता हूँ ये conflicting ideas को? This will actually decide the discourse of international global society. And if you are more interested, even for the readers, you can read about something called as global constitutionalism, wherein global constitutional norms should be adhered to. But ये सब क्या है कि even if we talk about these ideas, these ideas are not self-enforcing. It will depend upon what a particular state wants to do. So this is a problem with the system. We are running on a system of compromises. We live in an unequal society, but we are okay with the society. Since we are okay with the society, we are sustaining in the society. The day we are not okay with the society, the system will collapse. So this is the model of governance, I feel, of accommodation and giving space to this inequality.
If you can, explain further your idea of God exactly, God.
Okay. So this is a basic idea that actually talks about reforms in how the system should function. So according to UNSC model, I am giving authority to 5 states to take decisions, giving them veto power. Now, India is asking for a seat in UN with veto power. Okay. Now, the thing is that when India is asking about a seat in UNSC with veto power, aren't we also trying to be a part of this club, elite club that has the power? In a way, it will give us a representation, but it will actually make the system bad. Now, the problem here, when I talk about God, actually, is that I am talking about a democratic process. I don't elect US or China as a member of UNSC. They are member of UNSC from the very beginning. Okay, I elect myself as the leader of your country. Okay, this is the model. Okay, so when I talk about God, I am also talking about destructuring the system. How will you destructure the system? By ensuring that a democratic process becomes a part of decision making. अब ये democratic process कैसे हो सकता है? It can be that a group, maybe 20 to 30 nations, who are elected on the basis of their representation. Maybe the SAARC nations can come together and elect 2 members as their representatives in God. Maybe in Europe, 10 members are elected by European nations to be a decision makers in Europe, from Europe. Okay. What is it doing? It is providing more space for divergent opinion. Unless there are multiple opinions, you will always feel that selective people are taking decisions on your behalf. But are we empowering them to take decisions? No. But are we bound by their decisions? Yes. So this is like a foreign rule, right? Someone else is dictating what is right for you. Aren't we capable enough to take our own decisions? Aren't we capable enough to put in our representatives? But so UNSC is trying to reform. They are opening more spaces. But the thing is that this veto power has to go. That is the problem. And in God, I am not seeing a veto power being a part of the system. Because giving a veto to one particular state, you are giving the responsibility of the entire world to one particular state. And this is not how democracy functions. This is how authoritarianism functions. So this is the problem.
So the entire discourse that we have till now, would you believe to some extent that the model of Atmanirbharta that India is now projecting, is it a solution to a larger extent to what we just discussed, right? Like 5 countries, because they are more economically powerful, if they don't agree to God, maybe God will fail because they are the ones who actually run the trade, or maybe we have accepted the system wherein they run the trade. So if tomorrow we become Atmanirbhar, say for example, then even if North Korea becomes Atmanirbhar, it's able to give food to its people, then maybe people won't have a problem with Kim Jong-un and he'll be seen as a leader, any other leader, right? Because he's ultimately the people are happy there. So do you think that can be a solution to this?
So I'll answer this question in 2 parts. Okay. First is regarding this idea of Atmanirbharta. Okay. The best country I feel who is Atmanirbhar is Russia. Okay. If you remember, I talked about Russia has made their economy sanction proof by restructuring their trade, by restructuring their models of governance, by ensuring that they are not dependent on the Western banks a lot. They are able to supply things to outside and all these things. Now, the problem here is that we live in a society that requires interdependence. However, you will project yourself as an Atmanirbhar Russia or Atmanirbhar Bharat. The idea is that a country will require trade. A country, if it wants to function properly, will require assistance. A country will require cooperation, because no particular country can produce everything that the people need. Okay, and when we are living in a society that is changed because of technology, we are talking about a borderless society. We are talking about the dependence of us as a society on other countries for the purpose of technology, for the purpose of innovation, for the purpose of military assistance, for the purpose of security. Okay, for example, India wants to be an Atmanirbhar country. If I'm saying that India wants to be an independent country and can sustain itself, but for the purpose of security, we need arms from France. We wanted to bring our fighter jets Rafale from France. We want submarines from Russia. Okay, so no country, if I want to be an Atmanirbhar, and if I am saying that my people will get everything that is made by me, you are seeing what is happening with North Korea. Even though the projections are good, but on the basis of the happiness index, on the basis of what the people get, there is vast inequality. So it is not possible for a country to be Atmanirbhar in its true sense. The future of a good economy lies in how well you are able to manage our trade with other countries, how well you are able to manage corporations. So here comes a very interesting point. I'll wind up in 2 minutes with this point. That is called as fragmentation and defragmentation of international law. Now, when I'm talking about a society includes different people. Okay. And why are we happy as an individual? Because we live in a society. Think about a space where you have everything, but you are alone in the world. And there will be multiple people who are not in touch with you. Now, for the sustenance of any particular order, you will need something that we call a society. So international states that we talk about are also a part of a society. Okay, and we have evolved over the past few years on the basis of interdependence. I don't focus much on defense, and I focus more on agriculture because I know that I can get defense from a particular country. For example, there are countries who don't focus on agriculture but focus on defense, because I know that I'll get my grain from other country. So you see, may it be because of our geography, may it be because of our culture of the people, may it be because of our innovation, I am streamlining myself to a particular area that we call as super specializing in some particular area. I focus on agriculture because I know that my other needs can be satisfied from other parts. So true independence can never happen because we live in an interdependent society. And a success of your country will depend on how well you are able to manage this interdependence. And this is why there is a need for regionalism. That's why we need something known as BRICS or a SARC, because क्या है कि हमारा shared problems है. Problems that I face is also shared by Sri Lanka. Problems that I face is also shared by maybe Afghanistan few years back. So these shared problems will require shared responses. Europe that we call. Europe is a collection of different states. Okay, why? Because they have a shared problem. So that is why regionalism becomes more important. And interdependence, I think, is the future of the world.
Right. So now, I mean, related to pop culture, but not in a way that, not exactly in the terms of entertainment per se. But as we see, as we saw there was a series on Netflix called as the Windsor Palace. It showed you the life of the royal family and all of that. So people, people were attracted to that glam of the life that they, that they were projecting. Likewise, when we talk of K-drama, again, because of certain, I mean, I don't know what exactly people like about it. I've never studied it that closely. But again, there are some factors that make people fall for the glam that they are having. Similarly,
Hmm.
tomorrow, if we, maybe, I mean, I'm not saying this in a very wrong way, but we say that as a tool of modern diplomacy, can there be, can this field of pop culture be introduced in a way that we influence policy making in so much so that tomorrow the future leaders can be, say, Rihanna or can be A.R. Rahman or something like that? Can it happen to that extent?
Uh, so this is a very interesting question actually, and pop culture is something that I am very fascinated by. And very recently, I think a few months back, I actually presented a paper also at University of Pretoria on Black Panther and international law. So pop culture is actually, international law actually aims to be global and aims to be accessible to people. Okay. And pop culture is something that is global and accessible. So there is a similarity that what international law wants to achieve, pop culture has already achieved it. Okay. Now the future lies in intersecting these two things. But this is just an idea that I have. Okay. For example, how many do you watch Marvel movies? Marvels? Okay. Have you watched Captain America? Civil War,
Yeah.
Captain America Civil War?
Yeah.
Do you know what led to the Civil War?
The backstory you are asking, right?
Yes. Do you remember reading about the Sokovia Accords? There were two.
Not
There were
that
two actors.
buff.
There were two groups of one who adhered to Sokovia Accords, okay, and other who did not adhere to Sokovia Accords. Okay. So the background is that the superheroes were fighting for during their acts. They were causing harm to people and the infrastructure. So they said that their actions should be sanctioned by a UN system. Okay, and they enter into something known as Sokovia Accords. And उसमें दो parties बनते हैं, one who supports Sokovia Accords and one who don't, and ultimately leads to a war between these two actors, one led by Captain America and by Iron Man. Okay, what did actually happen? By using this tool of a Marvel movie showcasing the importance of treaties. So Sokovia Accord was a treaty which was asked by the parties to follow, but they did not, led to a war. This very simple analogy of Sokovia Accords, which Captain America and Iron Man, they conflict and enter into a civil war. This actually reflects our society. You have a system of law that asks you to do these things, but when you don't do it, it leads to a civil war. Okay, let's take an example of Incredibles. Incredibles lose their superheroship because of a tortious liability that is imposed on them. Okay, so you see, pop culture in a way reflects what happens in the society. Okay, and pop culture also reflects this alternative idea, this alternative reality that we talk about. For example, having Black Panther as a superhero in Marvels was important for two things. Okay, one was to represent a race that was not pictured as a hero. So you will see, apart from Black Panther, you don't find superheroes belonging to that race. Okay, but when we are talking about superheroship and when you are only projecting white superheroes, in a way you are reflecting a mindset that reflects that whites they have the power to do these things. So having Black Panther as a superhero also was an alternative to this idea that this minority can also be a superhero. Okay, and that was not just representation. In TWAIL I talked about representation is not important, but also decision making capacity is also important. That is the reason why in Avengers, when we watch the end game, the Black Panther has the right to take some decisions and others follow its course. It is also reflecting of this behavior, right? Of people who were not decision makers are getting a space to take decisions. Okay, so introducing pop culture into the system of law is very important. This is something that I am trying to do. For example, if I am talking about UN peacekeeping forces, you should all watch this movie known as Whistleblower, wherein UN peacekeeping forces are entering into human trafficking. Okay, when we study international law, what do we read? Books in our study materials, reference materials. There is a need to introduce movies into as a part of our study materials. There is a need to introduce podcast as a part of our study materials. Okay, so this is a moment to actually think beyond books, study society using a tool that we call as pop culture. It can be music, it can be movies, it can be series, it can be to study culture. You can also watch the K-drama that all of us this society is talking about. Okay, so pop culture actually influences the way we think. Okay, for example, let's talk about LGBTQ rights. Okay, we saw the judgment of Navjot Singh Johar and how we actually read down 377. Okay, of course I'll give credit to the Supreme Court for doing this, but the Supreme Court did it because the public opinion favored doing it. Okay, think about a society where the public was not ready to accept this. Okay, the success of any law depends upon how well the society is able to accept the reforms. Okay, and pop culture actually plays a very important role in changing the perception of society. Now LGBTQ community, we are ready to accept it because of, I would say, pop culture has played a very important role in ensuring that this is not something that is uncommon in the society. Okay, so pop culture has an influence on how we think, on what we read. Okay, what our idea is regarding something. Okay, we have seen people thinking about US as a democracy by watching movies that are made out from US, when they boast about their big buildings, their democratic patterns, and all these things. Okay, so pop culture actually shapes the way we think and way we read. But talking about whether Rihanna could be a decision maker, I think it's difficult. But I can definitely say that Rihanna has the capacity to shape decisions. That is the reason why we see that in our political campaigns, you see Salman Khan campaigning for a leader. Okay, why? Because these popular stars have an influence over people. But will it have an impact at the global level? I don't think so. But at a domestic level, it has an impact. Okay, for example, the president of Ukraine, who was he before becoming president? He was an actor and a comedian. He had a wider space. Actually, popular culture actually influences elections also. Okay, so in domestic policies, popular culture will shape policies. But at international level, how well it will shape, we never know. Considering the gap between technology, access to resources, and all these things. But I am seeing it closing down because of how well technology has enabled our culture to cross borders and ensure that our ideas are seen and watched and appreciated by people outside our borders. For example, in Afghanistan, Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum was the top rating series. Smriti Irani had a bigger fan following in Afghanistan than in India. So you are seeing how our culture is actually shaping the discourse of other countries as well. And pop culture will ultimately play an important role in the future as well.
So, okay, so let's do a quick rapid fire. Any 5 movies you recommend to watch?
Any 5 movies I recommend?
Regarding this space, right?
Okay.
Which you have obviously.
Okay, so the Whistleblower I really like. There is Just Mercy. Black Panther I really like. After that, Dark Knight series. There are Dark Knight series and one more, of course, Civil War. So actually, I watch a lot of fictions. So, and I try to actually link fictions with law. So it depends on how well you are able to read between the lines, read between the contents.
But if you have 5 more minutes only, I won't take much of your time. So
yes, definitely.
Yes, cool. So I just wanted to ask you now, because you talked that you said that pop culture is reflecting society, and so is the vice versa as well. Like society also somewhere reflects what movies are being made. So when we say that, say a movie like maybe Madari that was released in India, which talked of socio-political issues, that movie won't be a big success on the box office when in comparison to something like a Bajrangi Bhaijaan or something like a much more populist sentiment referring movie. So do you believe that this dichotomy that we are facing in the larger picture of pop culture, particularly in India, that our trends are we as students of law, we also want a movie like Section 375 to be the chart buster, but at the same time, I won't miss going to an Avengers over it. So
Yes, yes.
how do you see that approach? Like, how do you see the future of this?
So, so this is very fascinating actually. Okay. And when I talk about pop culture and the influence of pop culture, let's talk about Madari or Section 377 or any movie that or the Ship of Theseus if you have seen. Okay. All these movies, what are they trying to show? They are trying to reflect some social reality. And what so I always think of movies as something that actually, tries to formulate our hopes and our ideas or our image of society. But the thing is that there are some section of the society that are ready to accept these changes. For example, as you talked about, Madari was not a box office hit, but it had a great impact on the viewers. I do not, judge the quality or the impact of a movie on the basis of box office when it comes to its impact on the system that we call as law. A movie that might have been released in a YouTube channel could actually shape our approach towards law than a movie that crosses 100 crores or 200 crores in the box office. Okay. For example, our idea of artificial intelligence or our idea of robots could be shaped by a small documentary that came out on a YouTube channel than compared to a Matrix that was a box office hit. Okay. So the box office success do not represent the social validity or the ideas that they bring about. Okay. So there is a dichotomy, and I don't think the followers of pop culture actually visit movies or songs or videos or series for the purpose of entertainment. We don't watch movies for learning a new idea. Now, to study pop culture in the context of law, this approach that we have towards movies should also change. Okay, to series should also change. So this will require training to look at Black Panther not just as a Afrofuturistic hero who can do things, but also look at Black Panther as somebody who represents a reality that talks about justice, a reality that talks about representation, a reality that talks about equal space, equal right, a reality that talks about anti-racism in the society, a reality that talks about standing up for your own rights. So this will not be judged on the basis of the success of the movie in terms of its economical value. It depends on the success of this movie on the basis of the social impact that it has delivered. So I think this is a long process, and it depends on the skill that we have as lawyers to pick and choose the right things. And how do you pick and choose? By ensuring that are we able to locate ideas of justice in movies? Are we able to locate ideas of injustice in movies? But this is I'll say it's a continuous process, and this will require us to delve deeper into the subject, think more about this whatever we do. So like when juniors ask me that how can I write better? Okay, how can I write well? I always, the popular opinion that comes out is you have to read more to write better. Okay, but you will see writing is not just English. Okay, if you know good English, you will write. That is a misconception. A good writer is somebody who can think clearly. So you will see reading is one part, writing is other part. There is a small gap in between, that is thinking. Okay. And when I equate it with pop culture, seeing is one part, understanding is one part. What lies in between is thinking. So it depends on the things that you perceive, may it be in the form of text or may it be in the form of videos. Are we able to think about it from a critical angle? Are we able to locate our ideas of law with these ideas given in the movie? And are we able to bring a correlation? The success of somebody who researches in pop culture and law lies in how well he's able to, intermingle these two domains. So for this, box office is not good for us. It's for the market and the producers. What is important for us is the social benefit and the social value that it broadcasts through its domain of movies or space or whatever it may be.
Fantastic discussion we had today. It is I would say that So very often we have such thought-provoking discussions on podcasts because mostly it's about the guest and his journey, which I mean, there's nothing wrong in it. It's about the format, but I mean, this discussion I believe has the potential somewhere to be added in the curriculum in the future because all credit to you and the way you have collaborated each and every idea to from God to Madari to whatnot. I mean, pop culture, AI,
Thank you.
Ukraine, Russia, and Bhutan, and SARC, whatnot. Everything amazing, fantastic.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rajesh.
Thank you so
And
much for
Amaya,
coming here.
both of you have been wonderful hosts. I must say, I had a great time. Questions were on point. I really liked talking to both of you.